All right, committee, thank you for your prompt attendance. We have quite a few proponents. We're getting a little bit of a late start, and to the proponents, I would, as you give your testimony, you don't need to read it. As points are made, you don't need to repeat points that have already been made. I think we have the possibility of a good hearing and the possibility of doing some things. I've been speaking with the maker or the drafter, initiator of the bill, and I'm really hopeful at this point in the session that I want to work on this idea in a way that we move the issue forward, because I do think it's a good idea for us to be considering. And because of the time frame, in order for us to have a chance of doing something, before we even start, the hearing, is my intent to try to work this. There are no opponents, but I am looking at doing it in a pilot form in order for us to gather information on participation levels, see how it works, and then after a year, we would evaluate how the pilot went and look at taking it even further next year. But I think in order, in talking with leadership, to have a chance to move a good idea like this forward, is probably our best way of doing it. So I'm throwing that out here at the beginning just to make you aware that that's my thinking. My thinking does not carry the day, but it does set the framework for the hearing as we hear from our conferees. And again, there are no opponents. I want to take our best shot and I have spoken to her, and we're discussing ideas on how we can best do that. And so even as you speak to the bill, be aware that I think that that's the goal of the hearing, to capture the best of what we can do with this bill and this hearing, and move this bill forward as best we can. So with that, we're going to go ahead and let Jason give us an introduction to the bill. And then I'm also going to have Jessa Farmer, who has gathered some information, give us an update too on funding that's already out there from previous legislation, including Senate Bill 155. And it'll be just good information for you to consider as we have the hearing. And again, with that, Jason, thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. House Bill 2631 would create a supplemental form of state aid for school districts that offer career technical education courses. This state aid would be predicated on students obtaining an industry-recognized credential in a career technical education field. Under the bill, each school year, the State Board of Education, who is the agency that we direct to calculate these state aid provisions, would determine the number of students who were enrolled in each school district who had obtained an industry-recognized credential during the previous school year, and the cost of the assessment of that credential. Then the board would multiply the total cost of all the assessments for the school district by 120%. So the state aid is going to be equivalent to 120% of the cost of the assessments for the CTE credentials that are obtained by students enrolled in that school district. The bill then creates a new fund, the Career Technical Education Credential and Transition Incentive Fund in the state treasury, and the board then certifies the total amount of these new state aid payments. And that amount is transferred from the state general fund to this new fund, which is then used by the state board to distribute those payments out to the school districts. As I said, this is supplemental to current CTE funding for school districts. That comes in two forms under current law. The first, you're all probably well aware of, is the weighting through the school finance formula of a 0.5 FTE for any student who is enrolled in an approved CTE course at the school district. 0.5 means basically you get 1/2 of the base aid for the applicable school year and additional funding on top of the base aid for that student. The other form of CTE funding is a statute enacted back in 2012. that established the Career Technical Education Incentive Program. And under this program, the State Board of Regents awards school districts $1,000 for each graduating student that earns a CTE credential in an occupation that is determined to be the highest need for additional skilled employees as determined by the Secretary of Labor. That incentive program is subject to appropriations. I will defer to Jessa to update you on what the payments have been over the years and what the appropriation levels have been. But House Bill 2631 would go into effect this July 1st if enacted. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right, Jason, I still need to understand with what you just said that the payment for receiving the certification is on top of the funding already in place.
The school district will receive their CTE weighting, the 0.5, through their distributions of state foundation aid through the formula. They would receive their $1,000 award incentive through the State Board of Regents through that mechanism. And this would be a third layer of CTE funding coming from the state board in the form of these state aid payments.
Okay. And as we get into testimony, I'm sure that we'll be hearing more in regards to the how and the why and the need for this bill in order to further accomplish the goal of students getting those certifications. So further questions from the committee for Jason? Representative Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do we know what is the cost of those certification? Do we have an average cost on those?
We do not. The fiscal note stated that the State Board of Education could not at this time make an estimate of what those costs would be. I would defer to the State Board as to how long it might take to accumulate the various assessments and the cost of those and provide a better estimate.
Thank you.
And I think we might get a little bit of testimony to help clarify that, but that's one of the reasons for a pilot in order to better help determine. So further questions from the committee for Jason? Seeing none, thank you, Jason. And now I'm going to let Jessa just give she provided me some information that's kind of pertinent to the hearing, and I appreciate her providing it. And so welcome and thank you, Jessa.
Thank you, Chairman. Jessa Farmer with Legislative Research. In the state finance formula, the state reimburses school districts for a portion of the cost to transport 11th and 12th grade students to post-secondary vocational programs, and that reimbursement is based on the total number of miles driven and the size of the vehicle used. In fiscal year 2021, funding for CTE transportation was allotted by the governor. No funding was approved for fiscal year 2022 or allocated for fiscal year 2023. The Department of Education included an enhancement request in their fiscal year 2023 budget for $1.5 million to reinstate funding for the program. And for those, the $1,000 scholarships that Jason had mentioned for career and technical education, it's not currently funded and has not been for the past few fiscal years.
Okay. And that was kind of my point with looking at a pilot and with that funding out there that hasn't been and improved in the past. I do feel like there's a need to evaluate what we've done in the past, look at what we can do moving forward in the area of getting these certifications for our students. And that's why I'm excited to have this hearing and allow the conferees to give us their testimony on why it's necessary. With that, we are going to go ahead and officially open up the hearing. And we're going to start off with Cecilia McCrory as our first proponent. And I got to meet Cecilia for the first time. We've talked on the phone many times. She was my second selection to be on the computing science task force. I appreciated her service there and was excited to get to reconnect with her on this issue. She's worked very hard on this. I appreciate your time and effort and your enthusiasm for this bill. The floor is yours.
Representative Hubert and the committee for the privilege to share about this bill. House Bill 2631. I want the committee to know I became one of the first certified nurse aides in the state during my college years. And I'm sharing this story with you because I hope this will help you to understand that I've lived what I'm asking for. I worked as a nurse aide, and that allowed me to work nights and weekends while going to college to get my teaching certificate license. I knew I wanted to be a teacher from the time of second grade, and it allowed me to graduate with a triple major, 2 minors, with only $800 of debt because I got my CNA. I think that's pretty huge. Later, that also gave me a better paying summer job the first few years I was teaching. Then I used my certified nurse aide credential along with my special education license to help job coach and get multiple special education students through certified nurse aide class. And I'm happy to say that 7 of the 8 students are still working in healthcare because they got that initial help with the certified nurse aide. And I'm sharing that with you because I think it's helpful for you to see not just special ed, but that we can really, with this bill, could impact widespread basis while the students still have their K through 12 learning supports. And that's a very important thing to be aware of. If we help students acquire the industry meaningful credentials that are aligned to their individual plans of study, or help them acquire more post-secondary training in their desired career field while they're using that credential to help them to minimize their school debt, we're going to have healthier Kansans for the future financially. Industry credentials, they document a student's attained skill proficiency for a particular set of technical skills. And another thing that's important is that many of these nationally recognized industry credentials also have available student training support preparation materials available. And that's going to help us out in our rural school districts that don't have specialized teachers that have those specialized skills like to teach computer programming. But they could take and use those support materials that have videos, have all kinds of things to help facilitate so that that one kid or that 2 kid or 3 kids out in a small school could still get that high need credential. And that way then available teachers can help the student make progress without having to always be the content expert. I believe very strongly that schools need to become industry skill incubators, using the industry utilized tools so that communities will have the workforce that they need. And some of the industry tools like Microsoft Word, Excel, and PowerPoint are used by 83% of the enterprise-sized companies. QuickBooks certification software is available. The software is available free to all high schools. And currently, but to get the certification, they need to pay $95. And currently, 90% of the small businesses in the United States use QuickBooks. So as a former student told me, if you would have given me Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and QuickBooks, it would have really helped me to start my business. And I know there's been a lot of emphasis on Network Kansas and some of those kind of things to help promote entrepreneurship. I just want to tell you, this bundle of those 4 certifications would really help grow entrepreneurship in Kansas. And the reason I've suggested that school districts be the one that takes a lead on this, they're very well positioned to know the labor needs of their local communities. And they're also aware of what local employers are looking for more technical skilled workers. And so this bill that I've suggested would be done on a reimbursement basis so that you guys wouldn't be taking a risk. We'd only pay districts if the kid actually acquired the credential. And this would help us to achieve in Kansas a diploma plus an entry-level credential that paid at least a livability wage, which is at least $28,000 a year, while having their learning supports. And then we really would prepare Kansans, more students for their futures. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we're going to hold questions towards the end. I wanted to give, like I said, quite a few conferees. Most of them are Webex, but we have 2 more that are here in person. The next up is Mark Calvin. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Chairman Hubert, Vice Chairman Thomas, and the members of the House Education Committee, thank you for this time to testify. My name is Mark Calvin. I am the Site Director for an Adult Learning Center through SDAC. And I'm a proponent for House Bill 2631. My one-sheet statement that all of you have highlights several data points that are meant to emphasize how powerful a certification can be for any individual that can get that certification. It's important that our students have tools when they leave school to access further opportunities, like gainful employment and a sustainable wage. There are a lot of jobs out there that they receive a wage, but it's not one that they can sustain themselves or their family on. Let's talk data for a moment. If you look at the sheet I submitted, about 1/3 of the way down the page, you'll see a list of basic certifications that are requested or required by business and industry. Those certifications that are listed there, a majority of them are $200 for the certification, $200 or less for the certification. In fact, there are some combinations there that are less than $200 for all of those. I clustered those together as they were listed on multiple job postings on Indeed.com. So there, as you can see, the business is asking for a combination of those certifications. This is just a sampling of credentials, and it represents 8,932 job postings from January through February of this year on Indeed.com. If we match these postings 1-to-1 with the statewide senior class of 34,958 students, if we match it 1-to-1 and assume that every student of the 8,932 jobs fills it, that is roughly 26% of our statewide senior class that would have a certification. These are just a few of the credentials that were included in entry-level job posts. And during that time period, just a sampling of the skills that business and industry is asking that candidates have prior to applying for positions. Research out of John Jay University in 2008 shows certifications can provide a student with gainful employment and open up other avenues such as social emotional learning through confidence, which is part of the accreditation process here in Kansas. Incentivizing credentials will help bring a stronger focus to the implementation and importance of these certifications through student populations who need the supports before they leave the high school, such as IEP 504 and situations such as that. Incentivizing credentials will help organizations who work with clients. These are nonprofits and other private organizations such as workforce, your different workforce areas, your different nonprofits that work with homeless and different situations such as that. It will help them to provide and find more opportunities for those individuals to help them get reconnected with society. A certificate will help in post-secondary education. They get these initial certificates, they can go on to post-secondary education. For example, CNA was just brought up. CNA, we all know CNA is the gateway to any healthcare job. They can get that CNA while they're still in high school. When they go to college, they don't have to pay for the CNA classes. They can go on to LPN, RN, BSN. And it saves the student funding money, but also it allows the college to start that person at a higher rate, at a higher level class, and move them even farther forward. And it allows them, as they're going to college, to work as a CNA and receive those benefits, and they acquire less debt during college. So let's cycle back to the beginning of this testimony. We have to ask this question. Just how powerful are these certifications? Well, I'm going to throw some data at you. Feel free to write this down. Actually, you can find this on your own. It's all public data. As per the Kansas Department of Corrections 2021 annual report, over 54% of individuals who enter the regional diagnostic unit at El Dorado have, and I quote, have not completed high school or only have a GED, end quote. By looking at that stat from a different angle, students who gain a credential with their high school diploma decrease their possibility of incarceration by 54%. And by the way, the 54% is an average of the 51 and the 57 for males and females. I just averaged it together to get a single percentage. As per the report, the annual cost of one adult resident is $34,317, and a juvenile is $184,201 per year. Let's back up and look at this from the 30,000 foot view. The annual cost for 8,617 adult residents, which is the total current population of KDOC, is $295.7 million. The annual cost for 135 juvenile residents is $24.8 million. If we can help out one adult and one juvenile to be able to get them a credential and quite possibly keep them out of the correctional system, we save taxpayers, KDOC, and the state $219,000 a year, just over $219,000 a year. So these credentials would help address the rate of individuals incarcerated, and according to the John Jay 2008 study, can reduce the recidivism rate in Kansas by up to 38.4%. If we use 2021 data, that would equal to 676 individuals that were part of the recidivism rate. That would save the taxpayers and the state $23.2 million. Roughly the price tag of housing 135 juveniles. In comparison, if we invest in each high school junior and senior for a certification, we can boost the morale of Kansas kids, improve their skill level, increase their household income, open up opportunities for them, supply the workforce with the more skilled individuals, potentially decrease the incarceration rate and the recidivism rate in the state, all for much less than the price of not taking a chance on our kids' future. As you can see, certifications are incredibly powerful in the hands of fellow Kansans. Thank you for your time and consideration. I'll stand for questions.
We're holding questions, but thank you for your testimony. Next up is Heather Morgan. Welcome to the committee, Heather.
Thank you. I'm Heather Morgan. I'm the Executive Director of the Kansas Community College Association. We're happy to lend support to the concept behind this bill. My testimony strove to kind of talk about some of the questions that we have related to how the bill is currently drafted. So Senate Bill 155 has been in place since the Brownback administration a number of years ago. Last year, Kansas community and technical colleges served over 12,000 high school students, delivering 98,000 credit hours and providing 981 credentials. And those credentials are on a high-value credential list. And I know we've been talking a lot about credentials. There's not anybody in this room who don't think that our students shouldn't come out of high school with a credential, but there is a difference between some credentials and others. What we would like to ask for this bill to consider is to tying any incentive payments to high-value credentials that will actually translate in the workplace. So for example, in my testimony, I mentioned AWS welding, the Kansas Contractors Association, Mike Gibson, Build Up Kansas, the NCCR certifications. Those are truly high-value industry-recognized credentials. I serve on both the Governor's Education Council and on the work groups of the Advantage Kansas Coordinating Council. which has business and industry, the Kansas Chamber, and educators sitting together trying to work through these problems. And there's been absolutely no disagreement, which doesn't happen frequently when those groups get together. But there's been no disagreement that we must focus on these high-value credentials and not just a credential for credential's sake. We would also caution implementing anything as a pilot program. We had a $1,000 incentive for school districts to ensure students get a credential. When I talk to superintendents, I talk about explorers and completers. We don't want explorers for Senate Bill 155 classes. We want students to complete the pathway to become a completer so that they have a valuable credential in addition to their high school diploma when they leave. Senate Bill 155, Excel and CTE, as it's now called, pays for just the tuition. So the cost for the books, fees, supplies, and assessments are borne by someone else. I don't want anyone in this room to think it's borne by the school districts, because it is not all borne by the school districts. Kansas community and technical colleges often pay for the cost of those and absorb those costs within our budget. Sometimes students pay, sometimes the school district pays, but it's definitely not the school district paying for all of those costs. So one of the other things that we'd like this bill to consider is if there is going to be a reinstatement of the $1,000 or a weighting created, that the money generated through those funds has to plow back into helping students get credentials. An at-risk student, a foster care student who can't afford to buy the tools, fees, and assessments, they may not be enrolling in these classes. They're not entering our workforce. They're not meeting the needs of the various industries in Kansas. So the concept behind this bill is absolutely great. We need credentials, we need high-value credentials, and we need to keep our Kansas students connected to Kansas companies and living in the state. But we think that there might need to be a little bit of honing in, and we stand ready to work with anyone who would like to make sure that we target this investment in truly the areas that are going to make the most difference for both our Kansas students and our Kansas businesses. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. We're going to move over to the Webex portion of our conferees. And the first one listed is Mike Cargill, science teacher at Stafford High School. Welcome to the committee, Mike.
Thank you. My name is Mike Cargill. I teach at Stafford High School. I teach science. We're a small high school. We only have 50 students in our high school. We have freshmen through seniors. I would like to address House Bill 2631 from the perspective of economic development for the state of Kansas. Over the past few years, we've had 15 students that have received their CNAs and have chosen to work on temporary basis at our local healthcare facilities here in Stafford. And the reason I say temporary is because they work nights and weekends while they're going to high school and while they're attending post-secondary training. Of those 15 students, 3 of them still work locally as CNAs. 6 of them have become RNs. 2 of them are working in Kansas City, 2 of them in Wichita, and 2 of them in Great Bend. We currently have 1 student that is attending Barton County Community College in the nursing program. And I have 1 of those students who has become an occupational therapist and is working.
Just say, okay, yeah. We lost you there for a second.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, you're back.
Okay, not all of our students obtain CNA. Some of them become other certifications. 2 of them have become CPTs, which are certified phlebotomists, and now they're medical lab technicians. And those 2 individuals work at the Stafford County Hospital on a full-time basis. Of those folks who became CPTs, another one has achieved a master's degree in epidemiology and is working in Atlanta. One has been admitted to the veterinarian program at KSU. I believe this evidence supports the importance of House Bill 2631, and I would encourage your support. One of our goals for economic development is to grow our qualified workforce from within, and that's what the goal of this is. And I'd stand for questions at this point. Thank you for taking your time.
All right, thank you, Mike. We're holding questions until the end. Next up is Tyson Esslinger, Superintendent at USD 216. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, committee, for having me today. As I said, my name is Tyson Esslinger, and I'm the superintendent of a small 1A school district out in Southwest Kansas, Deerfield, USD 216. 2 years ago, when I took over as the superintendent of schools here, this is my home school district. I graduated from here in 2000, so I came back home to take over and lead the district. And one of the things we did early on was with the Board of Education, decided, looking at our students, visiting with our students, understanding that career and tech ed was a direction that we needed to go and that we needed to focus on. And so we began that process during the COVID year, as we call it now. And we started that year out with 180 students in our school district. And when we did enrollment this year, we went up to 245 students. That's unusual growth when you see what's going on across the state. And I contribute a lot of that to our CTE focus. During that year, we also went from 2 CTE pathways in our school district to 12 CTE pathways. And so our students now have many opportunities to earn some of these credentials that have been talked about. And I think in my testimony, I share about some of our students, and really cool thing that we've seen through this process is those students' confidence grow. Those were students who graduation maybe, because attendance was really hard, because the relevance of what was going on to them was not really high. And when we begin this focus around career and technical education and opening up these doorways and letting them explore and see, attendance got a lot better, and they got really focused and really excited about the possibilities for when they left us and graduate from USD 216. And so one of our students who's doing this, she's going to graduate with multiple certifications at the end of this year. And she was pretty set on becoming an EMT and thinking that was the direction she was going to go. She got her CNA. She took her EMR classes this fall semester, and at that point decided, I don't know. And so now she's in a work-based learning opportunity with our Kearney County EMT people, and getting to kind of see and make sure that this is the direction that she wants to go without having to figure that out after she leaves us in high school. And then I'll finish. We also employ a former student of ours, and he works for us now. And kind of like probably a lot of us, we thought we had it all figured out and we knew exactly what we were going to do. And everybody would try to tell us, this is what you need to do, or this is what you need to do. And he knew what he was going to do from middle school. And he graduated from us. He went out and started doing what he said he was going to do. He lasted 3 months, and then he was back at our doorstep wanting to know if we had any job openings, because what he wanted to do wasn't what he wanted to do. And now he's employed through us and in the position where he needs to be. But I share that because of the importance of career and tech ed and being able to offer different certifications in high school, students being able to explore those opportunities while they have the support of the school system before they graduate and head off out into the real world, as we like to say sometimes, and then have to figure it out, and then have to figure out what they're going to do after that. So I appreciate your time, and I'll be available for questions later. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Jennifer Weiberg. Welcome to the committee, Jennifer.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having us. I am the Career and Tech Ed Administrator, Overseer. I do all the certifications. I do all the scheduling for all of our kids in Deerfield. Have for the past 2 years. This is a new position for me. I've been in the classroom for 14 years prior to this. So this was all brand new. And I just kind of dove straight into it because our vision and our mission in our district is that every one of our students in Deerfield will graduate with a certification that is industry or post-secondary success meaningful. We want them to know what they want to do when they leave here. With that, I have hit the ground running in the last 2 years. And I am proud to say that with the efforts of the families in our community and the support of our administration, our senior class and our junior class will be graduating with certifications at 100%. Those include industry meaningful, industry recognized, and post-secondary success. So we do hone in on our Excel and CTE, and we have CNAs coming out of our programs. We have 6 students, 5 in that are juniors, 1 that's a senior that you'll be hearing from later, that are attaining their American Welding Society certification. We have 2 with CNAs. We have 1 with beef quality assurance. We're going into the workforce. So it is important for us, for them to have these credentials. It is more important that they're meaningful for their jobs. So it's my job to really work with the families on individualizing their plans, making sure that what they are obtaining is going to mean something to them when they leave this building and we like to have those conversations with not just our students, but with our parents as well, so that we're all on the same page and we're connecting them into industry in our area. It's important for us that we work on growing our own. We want to keep our kids in Kansas. That is super important to us. We are a small school. We are much like Stafford. We have, I think, a little over 50 now in our high school. So like Mr. Esslinger said, we are growing. So it's been an easy pivot, so to speak, at this point right now. As our enrollment is growing, it's going to be more of a task at hand for us to do that. So it would be critical for us in going forward to have the assistance outside of the Excel and CTE courses and certifications to be able to get reimbursed for these certifications, because I know, as it's been stated, they can range anywhere from $50 and $60 to, I know there's a couple on there that are $2,500. So it just depends on what our kids are doing to give them that meaningful credential. In closing, my biggest goal in this position and with you is that we make sure that we provide every instance for students to have what they need to be successful when they leave high school, and make an impact on our communities and keep them here. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next up is Denise Muscle. Welcome to the committee, Denise.
Hi, thank you for allowing me to speak today. I am a parent of a student that is currently going through one of the pathways here at Deerfield. She started last year as a sophomore. She actually started in the CNA program and decided halfway through that wasn't for her. So she has now transitioned over into the early childhood, and her goal has always been to go to college. She would like to become a teacher, so she's going to use her certification while she attends college. She's going to use that to work, and so it will allow her to get a higher paying job while she attends college to get her teaching degree. But not all students are like my child and don't have the dreams to go to college. So these programs allow other kids that don't want to go to college maybe to get a higher paying job with their certification than they would just with their high school diploma. So these programs are really important to our children get really good paying jobs once they get out of high school, whether they go on to college or if they just go out into the workforce. Thank you.
All right. Next up is Henry Ortega. Welcome to the committee, Henry. We can see you. Go ahead and proceed.
Hello, I'm Henry Ortega. I'm the senior here at Deerfield High School, and I have been taking the welding career pathway for the past 3 years now. And let me just say, it's an amazing pathway. I like it, and I am very excited to go into a career field, into the industry. And I did not when I first started here, I came ever since I was a little boy, all the way up through to a senior, you know, and it's been pretty fun. I've enjoyed it. And I didn't really do that good academically, but I am very glad to be working in the welding pathway to take the certificate that I'll be getting and going into a career that will help me out in the future. And I'll be receiving the American Welding Certificate with the 1G backing and the 1F and 2F. Before I graduate, I plan to get the 2G backing as well certificate. So I would love to become an independent welder and run my own business or company one day. And I feel like this certificate would allow me to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your testimony. And next up is Audrey Muscle. Welcome to the committee, Audrey.
Thank you for allowing me to speak today. My name is Audrey Muscle and I'm a junior at Deerfield High School. I've been taking dual credit classes since I was a sophomore, and this year I've been focused on taking my early childhood education. At the end of this year, I will walk the stage in May at Garden City Community College with the Early Childhood Development Program. I also plan to take the para-pro test, and next year I will, as a senior, I will work in a work-based learning. And I will go to college and enroll in elementary education. And I will also work with my certificate to have a higher paying job while going to college to finish with less debt. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, that I think wraps up our proponents that were speaking, unless there's anybody else in the committee room that was wanting to speak today. Seeing none, you will also see the written proponents, including Dina Horst and Ben Jones from the State Board, Mark Tallman from the School Board Association, Jason Watkins with the Wichita Regional Chamber, Martha Gabehart with the Kansas Commission on Disability Concerns, Tia Bunch with the Nursing Coordinator at Cali College, and Betty Jo Schrack, a social worker. All right. Anybody else again before we get into questions? Seeing none, we're going to go ahead and open it up for questions. And I'm just going to start with a couple. Ms. McCrory, I know that we talked briefly on the 1.2 piece of the funding, and that 20. Okay, I was speaking on the discussion we had about the 1.2 on the funding there, and looking at the possibility, even as, you know, with a pilot, you know, what impact would there be if that was just paying for the cost of the certificate as opposed to the 1.2 in funding? Do you feel like that would be workable at the 1.0?
It's workable. There's a couple things I'm really hoping we can accomplish with this legislation, okay? Number one, we don't just go after a certification to say, okay, we've checked the box, the kid's got it. But we're actually asking the school districts to help make connections with what are the needs in their area so that all of their kids get something that's meaningful for the jobs that are needed in their area. And I know how school districts tend to be, and that is, if there's not a carrot of money, they don't tend to go that direction. Now, there are some like Deerfield, what they did it. But I'd like to see 283 do that. And so that was the thing there. The other thing, I know these higher wage, you know, and I included a sheet that had the 41 highest, based on labor market, highest need things. You know, notice there's a gap on some numbers because those will pay below 28,000. And that's why those numbers left out. But I think we also have to look at, are we giving every kid an industry meaningful credential for the highest ability they have. And so I guess what I'm saying is, I think there will be some kids that the most they can do is a food handlers. But if we give them that, they can work and earn wages and pay taxes as opposed to sitting at home in mom and dad's basement.
That kind of falls into some of the discussion, I think, that Ms. Morgan from the community colleges in regards to the high-value credentials versus some that are not. So it sounds like, and I would love maybe after the meeting for the two of us to talk about that point a little bit
Right.
more. But, and
And I'm all for the high-value ones, and I would like to see as many of those as possible. But my number one goal is, with this bill, is that every kid comes out of high school with an industry meaningful credential, and therefore does not start at square zero with
Okay.
being able to get their first job.
Okay. So Heather, I would like to follow up with Heather Morgan then in regards to your comments in that area, as far as even as we look at language that we might work together on how we accomplish that goal versus the goal that you're talking about for the ones that are high value. How do we make that distinction in the bill in order to meet both goals?
A few ideas. One is if it's a 504 kid or an IEP kid, perhaps there's a different list. But I think we want to be really careful that we don't incentivize the wrong credentials, because we could actually have a backslide in what we've been trying to accomplish for industry. So if a school district can get a low-level credential for maybe their middle or upper-level kids, that's not the best thing that we can do as a state, and certainly not going to meet the needs of industry. So I think that we need to figure out, how do we serve kids who truly may have limitations with one list, and kids who we want to be pushing and striving to do more and to make a higher wage on the other. So I kind of see it as two tracks, two maybe different funding sources, but being also really careful that not all certifications cost the same thing. So quite frankly, a CNA certificate is $40 to do the assessment test. So $40 versus maybe a $295 EMT, those are very different things. And so I might suggest also that there are various work groups already in place across state government and across the private sector with state government and educators. Perhaps we could set up a system that those groups who are already in place could maybe approve and vet the credential list and push those out to post-secondary. I think we all want the same thing, but we just want to make sure that as we do this, we don't have any unintended consequences.
Have you already provided those credential lists to this committee? Or
I think the third page of my testimony is the currently approved list. Okay. There's another list that I've just been made aware of that perhaps we would look at for the 504 IEP kid goal. That might be a different payment structure, but there are a few lists already out there that have been vetted by industry, by the Department of Commerce, by labor.
If you could help us to get those lists, get it either to Deborah or to Jason, my revisor, because we can look at that discussion as we look at changes to this bill.
The other thing I just want to mention, and my friends at KSDE can thank me later, if we are looking at this as a reimbursement process with receipts, that's going to be really administratively heavy. So just thinking about how is the most administratively easy way to accomplish this so we don't waste money on administrative tasks, but we get to the point that we want, which is kids getting credentials.
Okay. Further questions from the committee? I'm sorry. Oh, go ahead. Representative Featherston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not really sure who to direct this to, but do we find that there are industry, for instance, nursing homes, other things that are already willing to pay for students' certification tests and/or education if it's not already provided free through the state?
So for high school students, because they're not generally full-time employees, it's a little bit of a different thing. We also have the Promise Act, which is amazing and wonderful, that we hope you all see a trailer bill soon about for other students. Generally, because these are high school students, we don't have as much industry paying for it. Usually it's the community college or the school district or the parent who's paying. Not to say that like the Associated General Contractors, they're providing curriculum, the NCCER curriculum, which leads up to that test. So they're sort of giving the school something free, but they're not paying for the test. So there's some trade-offs, and definitely industry is involved in all of this, but direct paying for tests, I'm not aware of anyone.
Okay. Further questions from the committee? Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like any of the conferees to give your opinion on the Jobs for American Graduates program. You think that's a good program, an effective program, and how would those two kind of work hand in hand?
I think that JAG students are some of the students we're trying to reach here, right? A JAG student may or may not have other at-risk things in their background. So ideally, the person who's in the JAG program is getting all the supports from the JAG, but they're also progressing on a path to a credential. And I know that we're also working with JAG through some registered apprenticeship programs. So JAG is amazing supporting kids who need extra support. There's no doubt about that. We would obviously like them to be on a path to an high-value industry recognized credential or further higher education. We're pitching the Promise Act to JAG students all the time as well, because those are the students who may be first generation, may not have the supports to go on to higher ed, and that we want to stay in the Kansas, hopefully earning good wages and becoming productive citizens and taxpayers.
Further questions?
You view this as complementary?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further questions from the committee? Representative Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry, your name. Clelia. It was mentioned about the high-value credentials, and of course, you work with special ed kids, so there will be some that they...
With all kinds of different kids. I've worked with special ed as well as the other. My concern is I just want to help Kansas schools have 100% of their kids, as much as possible, actually having a skill when they leave. Because I've seen too many kids, including my neighbor, that graduated from high school but doesn't have a skill, and so they just aren't getting plugged in. And he was on an IEP, and that was great while he was there, but if you don't help them transition while they have their learning supports, they just don't make that jump. So I think we've got about three things here. We've got our lower functioning kids that really need even a food handlers or a food manager or a CNA or that kind of thing, and that's as far as they're going to go. We have kids that are college bound that if we would give them a credential like I got in '77, they wouldn't have the amount of debt that they're tying in. I knew from the time I was a second grader, I wanted to be a teacher, but because I was a low-income kid, and because I could use the nursing home to help pay my way through school, I came up with so much less debt. And I would like to pay forward to the next generation to help more kids be able to do what I was able to do.
Thank you.
I see too many kids paying a lot of debt.
Go ahead, follow up.
Yeah, and thank you for that moving testimony. But I guess the question is then, how do we incorporate this in the bill? And I think one of the ways we could do this, because the kids who have an IEP, if we use that as a dividing point, possibly, that the lower level credentials would be sufficient, and those who didn't have an IEP, you could go elsewhere with it. But it could be written into the IEP. Would maybe be one way to do that if we can incorporate that.
And you might follow up with Jason on that idea as we begin to flesh out some ideas, but that is a way of doing it. I appreciate your comment. So
thank you.
Again,
Representative Schmidt and the committee, I'd like to also share with you that, sad to say, there's a number of our transition coordinators that do not know much about industry certifications. I've been working with my area, the state, to try to help them understand, but that's something else that the schools are going to need to do, is to help people know what's in those certifications and help parents understand what's in those. No, we're not just setting the kid up and that's all they're going to do, but help them to see what this parent from Deerfield saw, which was, hey, this was a vehicle to help my kid be able to do more. And I appreciate your help.
thank you. Further questions from the committee? Representative Schreiber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this might be for if the folks from Deerfield are still online, but for anyone else in the audience as well. But I grew up out in Garden City, and so I'm familiar with the demographics out there. Are there special challenges with ESL students that trying to get them into the workforce and so forth. And if anybody wants to address that, I'd appreciate it.
Heather Morgan, Community Colleges. Dodge City has 16% enrollment growth this year. Y'all aren't hearing about enrollment growth of a lot of other places, and it's mostly the Hispanic population. And obviously, their K-12 system and their superintendent is all in on this. He's the co-chair of the Governor's Education Council. What we've found is that population is going to stay close to home. Family is very important. They're not likely to leave, and so getting them skilled up and connected to the local workforce. There's a 3% unemployment rate in Ford and Finney County. Every single person's got to be in the workforce to make this go, and so that's a really important population, and Dodge City's recently had a lot of success getting those students engaged.
Representative Estes.
My question is for the superintendent. I'm not sure if they're still online. And if he's not, maybe I'll go ahead and ask it to you. Thank you, Superintendent. Do you guys have a cap on how many times you let a student take an assessment that your district pays for?
We've never ran into that, and we don't put any caps on there or anything like that. We try to work really hard to make sure they're prepared the first time that they go in and take that, but we haven't put any cap in place.
Okay, thank you very much. And may I ask the reviser a question? Because I'm sorry, it occurred to me as we were hearing testimony. I don't think I see a cap here in how many people could take this. So we're calling it a pilot program, but we sort of have a cap because we say it's subject to appropriations.
Again, that's the challenge that I have even in putting together a bill that we could get out of this committee and then convincing appropriations through, in a pilot, doing a proviso language that they would appropriate funds based on how this bill spells it out.
Okay. And then from my read, I believe that you see this as a separate fund away from what we already fund schools.
Yeah, and that's the other thing that I would like Jessica to maybe to check into funding that's out there that hasn't been appropriated, to see, is there any efforts to look at those issues? I think it might be a way for us to sell this bill to say that there's things that are out there that are possibly could be funded that aren't, and for us to look at this as a way to, based on those things that aren't being funded, to look at funding this as an alternative. And so as we move forward, that might be helpful to look at those kind of things to help make the case. So Representative Samsel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question for one of the conferees, if possible, has to do with the cost of the assessment and kind of what goes into those credentials. Are those all outside organizations, and how do they come up with what goes into it and the cost?
So there are probably 100 different assessments that we're talking about across all of these industries, and it's sort of like a name brand. You know, like you take the ACT and the ACT costs X. It's the same way with these credentials. So a plumbing certificate through NCCER, which is the National Construction Industry, they determine the test costs, and they actually have a curriculum that leads up to that test. So if you complete the curriculum, you ought to pass the test. So everyone is different. Generally, they're mostly under $100. There's a few specialized ones that are more, but generally they're not that much. To Representative Estes' point, we would hope all students would be prepared and pass on the first time, but that's not the reality of the world. And so we only pay, if a college is paying, we only pay one time because they should have been prepared.
Thank you. That's helpful. My concern, I guess, was if they found out somebody else was paying for it, if costs then start to creep up. So just something I was considering.
That's one of the reasons I brought this up in my bill, because I think there was an assumption in the bill that schools were paying for these assessments, and that's not what's happening across the state. So
thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Stockstill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this sounds like a terrific program, and I look forward to voting in favor of it. But I had a couple of questions about numbers here. I noticed that in 2018-19, 1,806 students got the CTE credentials, and in 2019-2020, 1,205 students apparently got that. Is there? I would think that the interest in this would be going up, and this went down 33%. Is there something I'm missing here?
explorers versus completers. You found the problem. We have explorers who are taking Excel and CTE classes, but they're not following through the pathway and getting to the credential. So anything that we can do to discourage exploring and encourage completion and sitting for that exam, that's a much better investment of taxpayer dollars. And so that's why we're sort of focusing on, we need to move people to getting that credential, no matter what the level is. If they've taken the education, get the credential so they'll have that for the rest of their life. Because if they don't sit for the test now, the likelihood of them passing it a year from now is probably not very good.
Well, so following up on what you just said, this bill focuses on the credential, only pays for the credential, it doesn't pay for the Explorer.
Correct, but if schools were financially incented to encourage their students went through enrollment practices, so if you took welding 1 and you didn't take welding 2, it would behoove a counselor to say, well, why aren't you taking welding 2? Don't you want to get your credential? Some of those sorts of things. Okay. Sometimes money motivates different practices at the student level, and we want to encourage enrollment in the pathway and completion of the pathway.
Yeah, and that's where I'm trying to figure out how best to make the best of these different circumstances, putting it in a language, getting something passed and getting something funded. And, we probably won't get the optimal, but this is good testimony for us to have this discussion. And I know for Jason, my revisor, I'm going to be asking him to take this input and help me to work on this. So thank you for all your testimony. Did you have a comment, or I'd be glad to let you answer a question that's been brought up?
I think there's also the question about the decline in certifications. I think there's also another problem to that. There's another issue to that. And it goes back to making the cutoff with IEPs. You're missing a whole, if we make the cutoff with IEPs, we're missing a whole swath of kids. Probably the bottom 20 to 30% of kids who have over a 70 IQ, but life happens. That's what we tell at the Learning Center. Life happens. They need that step up to get the funding, to get the job, to get into college. They need that step up. You're missing a whole swath. We're missing a whole swath of kids there. Why is the decline in enrollment? Because, well, number one, we have a lot of pathways that don't end in a certification, but also there are a lot of students who can't afford those certification tests, and the immediate jobs in their area don't require those. I mean, I listed in my one sheet, I listed 8,900 jobs across the state that don't require anything that's on the list. And that's part of the problem is we're missing those kids at the bottom who need that step up, and then they can get those higher end credentials. I'm all for those. But there are a lot of students out there that they live minute to minute, day to day, and they just need a chance to get something to get to where they can get those credentials. So, I mean, that's a part that I just want to bring out that everybody thinks about. There's a lot of students out there that I see them every day coming into the Adult Learning Center. They just need an opportunity to get to that level where they can get that certification. Thank you.
Again, this is good testimony as we try to sort through finding that compromise language that gets us to the best type of a pilot. And then once we get through a pilot, we can evaluate these types of questions even further as you'd look at a more permanent solution. But this is a good way of evaluating and putting something in place and getting started, and then making it better after we gather the data and see what we accomplish and don't accomplish. So I appreciate your testimony and everybody else that's testified today. We have one more question before we wrap things up. Representative Sanders.
And dovetailing off of that, Mr. Chairman, so Heather, I think I understood you to say that you don't want this to be a pilot program. So could you clarify why not?
Yes, we would be concerned if this was a pilot program because the school districts across our state are vastly different, as are the community and technical colleges. So just because it worked in one area of the state at one college doesn't mean it's going to work everywhere. So if there was going to be some sort of pilot, I think it would need to be at least 4 places around the state, a mix of community and technical colleges, just because the certifications even would be vastly different if you're talking about Liberal in Seward County versus what they might do in Johnson County. So a pilot program needs to we're looking at really, is this going to work statewide? It's got to be representative of the differences in our state.
So, in other words, if the pilot program was executed correctly, you would be okay with it.
Correct. But not just one location and one pilot.
I understand.
Yep.
And
Thank
you
you.
might speak with Ms. McClory. She's got a list, I think, that might meet your criteria, but I'm willing to look at working with you and her to kind of tweak that to meet your goal. So after the meeting, if you would, she's got a list right now she can show you. And if we need to add or subtract from that, I'm very flexible on that. Appreciate, again, the question. I feel like this is a good hearing. I do have the goal of moving this issue forward. I think we have consensus with the committee that it is a good idea that we want to pursue. And I appreciate if, I would like to move quickly because we're at a point in the session, the longer we delay, the less opportunity to getting something approved and signed by the governor. Because of that, I am going to be, I've already spoken with Jason about putting something together based on preliminary discussions in today's hearing. If you have thoughts or comments, get them to Deborah and I, and we'll get them to Jason so that we'll take our best shot at putting something together. And then after that, your input and possible amendments would be a part of the discussion for us to work the bill and get the best possible product. We're not going to get the perfect. My goal is to get the best we can get something that we can get funded in appropriations in a way that we can get good information and prepare ourselves to do even better with better data. And the next year, that's what a pilot allows us to do. That's what proviso language will allow us to do, is to get something going and make it better as we proceed. Plan, do, check, act, it always works good, and that's my goal. We will see you tomorrow at 1:30. And again, if I can get even a starting point to working with Jason for us to look at something, I'm going to try to do that. If not, we'll work on it next week. But again, if you have thoughts, get with me. And again, Jason's very willing for you if you just want to email him a thought or a comment, and we will consider those as we start working on getting something for this committee to look at. With that committee, I'll see you tomorrow at 1:30. We are having an update on the dyslexia task force, tomorrow. And after that, we'll spend some time looking at this bill if possible.